Good afternoon, Peter Carson here from Extranet User Manager. Welcome to our part two of our Office 365 site provisioning automation webinar. For those of you who haven't attended a talk before, quick intro on myself. I'm the president of Extranet User Manager, also a SharePoint MVP and a partner seller with Microsoft Canada. My contact information is up on the slide here. We're going to be sharing the slides afterwards. We'll send out a follow-up email to all attendees as well, so you'll have all that information there as part of that. Quick background and history on Extranet User Manager. It goes back about 10 years or so. We started it as a custom Extranet solution that we built for a number of different clients. And about 5-6 years ago, we started to turn that into a product and sell it specifically out for SharePoint, then added Office 365 support, and since then have added broader support for general applications that can do federation and looking for Extranet type solutions through that. We've more recently added in Azure B2B support and last year launched out our channel partner program. We now have, I think, more than 75 plus customers. We haven't updated this slide in a little bit. Primarily here in North America, some in Europe, Australia, Asia as well, all around the globe. Today we're going to be focused on SharePoint Online and Office 365 groups. SharePoint Online, if you're not familiar, I'm assuming most people probably are, a portal application platform that you can build sites to communicate and collaborate on, whether that's for your corporate intranet, for your team sites, for forms and workflows, lots of different things you can do as part of that. We're not going to get into the full functionality of everything you can do in SharePoint. That would take far too long, but I want to focus in on kind of the idea from Microsoft Ignite of the three places to work and where that falls into the spectrum here. We've got personal files that are private by default, although they can be shared, team sites that you work on with your group, and then communication sites for informing and engaging a broader audience. And if we look at specifically what we're going to narrow in on today here, it's specifically around the team sites, the collaboration sites. You know, how do we provision those and then extend those to people outside of our organization so they can collaborate with us? By default, any members of team sites are going to be authors as well. The idea is that it's not a publishing site, it's a place for people to collaborate and contribute to. The concepts that we're going through today would apply to communication sites as well, though if you had a broader audience that you wanted to securely publish content out to, by all means that would make a lot of sense too. Typically, team sites are used at the department level, maybe for committees, for projects, or common scenarios we see there. And external sharing is fairly common with that, whether that's with your clients, your vendors, your partners, what have you from that perspective. Now, in the Office 365 world, over the last couple of months, Microsoft's been launching out the modern team sites, modern communication sites. When you create a modern team site, under the hood, what you're actually getting is an Office 365 group. And it makes up a wide variety of different workloads within the Office 365 platform. And depending on how you create your Office 365 group, you're going to get a different set of workloads available to you there. This is a good slide done by Matt Wade, another Office 365 MVP. Kind of explains, depending on where I start, what sort of things do I get coming out of that. And we're going to focus on the SharePoint kind of in the middle there. When we create a modern team site through SharePoint, we get all the blue items through there. So we're going to get a planner, the SharePoint site obviously with a OneNote notebook inside of it, a stream video portal, and a Power BI workspace. We're also going to get an inbox and shared calendar stored in Exchange. If we'd created it through Teams, we'd also get a Teams wiki and Teams chat, or if we'd used Yammer to create it, we would have also gotten a Yammer feed group as part of that as well. So a couple different scenarios depending on how you work that out. What I'd like to get a quick sense from the group, though, before we go further, is just get an idea of how familiar people are with Office 365 groups today. Do they use them, and in what sort of fashion? So let me just pull that poll up, launch that out. So you can just let me know, are you using the full Office 365 groups experience, or maybe you're using modern team sites but not the rest of groups just yet. Or you're using classic team sites, whether you're on premise, which doesn't have Office 365 groups, or online using classic sites, or you're just not familiar with Office 365 groups and looking to learn more about that. All right, let me give you a sec just to collect the last few from there. So let me close out there. and just share the results back with the group. So, small percentage, only 10% using the full Office 365 groups experience. Not surprising, that's all pretty new. It's changing pretty fast from Microsoft. About 20% using modern team sites. I'm quite a fan of them. I'm going to show you, some of the details of the modern sites themselves, but not the groups just yet. A majority, though, using classic team sites. And we're actually in that same bucket ourselves. We've got a lot of historical sites, which are classic team sites, which are actually sub-sites. We're going to have to work out a plan to move those into modern site collections. We're just putting ideas together on that as well. It might be a future topic for a webinar in terms of how do you convert an Office 365 tenant that's got a deep hierarchy of sub-sites and classic sites into the modern experience, because there's a lot of advantage in being there. Then about 10% not familiar with Office 365 groups. I'm not going to go too deep on groups, but I will touch on different features as part of that. All right. So the main focus here is about site provisioning. And if you attended my previous webinar last month, we went through a process that we put together, and we've actually open sourced it out for doing a self-service site provisioning request form and process behind that. So let's just have a look back at what the solution requirements were for that application. We wanted a self-service form that end users could fill in to say, hey, I'd like a new site. Generally, a lot of organizations don't want to turn on the self-service site creation for everybody in their organization because you get a lot of site sprawl and duplicate sites and things like that. So it's a good idea to have some sort of approval review process in there. So let's make sure we can support an approval process, and that it's easily extensible and customizable for each organization's requirements. They're going to have very specific requirements unique to them. We need to be able to support that. We want to leverage both out-of-the-box and customized site templates, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. And obviously, we want to support modern sites and Office 365 groups. That's the future direction where things are going. We want to make sure we support that. Now, the last point was more for not scaring off non-developers. The idea was that we didn't want to use Visual Studio or any compiled code. There is a fair bit of PowerShell involved in it. We're going to go through some of that code. If you're not an IT pro familiar with PowerShell yourself, don't worry. A lot of the content we're going to cover today is at a much higher level than that, but I will get a little deeper down in there just to give you a sense of how that hangs together. And then in terms of supporting technologies, how this is all wired together is we use a Power Apps form as that self-service site request form. We're going to show you that form in just a minute. There's a flow workflow running behind the scenes that basically looks for new requests. That's how the approvals happen and the initiation of the provisioning process, which launches out to an Azure function that's hosting some PowerShell to run that code and basically do that provisioning for you. So we've actually put all the source code up on GitHub. I actually just refreshed the drop this morning, so it's got all of the latest code that I'm going to be showing you today. You can go onto github.com, pull that down from there. You don't need to sign up or do anything from that point of view. It's all available and open source from that perspective. We're planning on putting some articles up on our site that describe more of the process that we're going through. Right now, we've got a consolidated ebook that we have put up there, so feel free to download that, have a look at that. It doesn't have the steps for the integration that I'm going to be focusing on today. We're going to be adding that onto the ebook shortly, but it's got all the full site provisioning process around that. We've also got a couple case studies for Associated Engineering, which is kind of the genesis for this whole project. They worked with us to move to Office 365 about 1.5 years ago, and we built out the site provisioning process in a different form for them. It was more of a Visual Studio C# code kind of approach, and we decided to see if we could simplify that and use more out-of-the-box features as part of that. So how does this all hang together? What does this look like? Well, it starts with a SharePoint list, and this is used to track both the existing sites. When you create the list, there's a script that will create it for you. There's another script that will actually go and interrogate your tenant, find all of your site collections, subsites, and populate the list. So you got a full list of all the existing sites. It's also the place that you come to make new site requests. So you can do those directly into the list. We can use a Power Apps application, or what we're going to do today is we've actually used Power Apps to customize the SharePoint list form. So that's a new feature. It's not fully rolled out just yet. It's in early release or first release tenants right now. Should be coming out fairly soon more broadly from there. When that entry gets entered into that list, Microsoft Flow, which is the cloud-based workflow solution from Microsoft, gets triggered. to say, hey, there was a new request just added in there. Needs to go through approvals if required, and then call out to the Azure Function app to actually run the PowerShell and do the heavy lifting in terms of actually provisioning that site. Okay, so let's actually go into demo mode, which is where we're going to spend most of the next 45 minutes or so, is actually live going through the scenarios. So I'm going to jump between a number of different browsers, but let me start in our demo site here. So I'm in a site collection called Landing, and it's got a list in it called Sites that's used for the site provisioning. Now this is our demo site. It's only got a couple test sites in there. Our broader one I'll show you from a production point afterwards. So if I come into that sites list, I can see the details behind it. There's a whole lot of columns in here. As an end user coming in, you would never really look at this view here. There's a lot of sort of back-end processes that are tracked through this list. But I can see the details in individual items through here. I actually want to be in the modern experience, which is a nicer experience from a list point of view. I can look at individual items in there, see all the properties, update properties through here. Microsoft's done a nice job in the modern experience, just tidying up how you manage metadata, list entry, document libraries, things like that. But let's say we want to create a brand new site. So I click on the new button here, and we can see here we've got a customized form that comes up. It's simplified. It only has the fields that we care about linked in through there. In fact, I can actually go back to the home page here, and I put a quick link here to request a site that goes right to that form as well. So a number of different paths to get to the same spot, and I can see that form. Now as a site owner, I have the ability to customize that form. I can go off into Power Apps and actually build out exactly what I want that form to look like. I'll show you quickly what that interface looks like. If you're not familiar with Power Apps, it's kind of a power user forms development tool. It allows you to not just customize SharePoint list forms, but to create complete standalone apps. They don't even need to connect to SharePoint. There's connectors to literally hundreds of different systems, and you can create your own custom connectors as part of that as well. So we've got a form layout here. I can grab individual items, rearrange cards in here, and hide and show different fields, add in rules and advanced functions and things like that, all as part of that. I'm not actually going to save any of those changes. I'm just going to go back to SharePoint. Okay. So let's bring the form up here. We're going to call it Webinar Demo 1. We'll be very creative. Now the first thing I need to do is decide what template I want to use for the site. And I have a choice here of a number of different templates that we've configured. And this is an obvious case of where you would want to customize specific to your organization in terms of what template sites you want to have. Now you notice that we've got classic team site, modern communication site, and modern team site in there. Those are the out-of-the-box sites. In fact, if I was to go over to my SharePoint app for a second here, just compare and contrast this with the out-of-the-box site provisioning experience. If I come to the SharePoint app in my launcher and come to create site here, I've got a similar option of creating a team site or a communication site through here. Now Microsoft is actually extending this process here to allow you to add your own custom templates and customizations to this process. Ultimately, I think their goal is to allow you to attach your own PowerShell to the process, which would be awesome. That, if we could hook into here, have some approvals as part of that, customize this process, that would make sense to light this back up again. But for now, we prefer to keep it within here and allow complete control over how the provisioning process is going to work. Now, in addition to the out-of-the-box templates, we've also got a modern client site and a modern project site. So those are slightly different. They're templates that we use at Envision IT, which is the parent company of Extranet User Manager, as we're working with clients. So every client we engage with, as we're doing a project, we always create a client site, which historically has been a classic team site with some customizations on it. More recently, we've created a modern version of that, and we've saved a template of that as our modern client site. And I'll show you a little later how that templating process works. We also have a modern project site. So each project we do for a client, we create a project site for that. Again, historically a classic team site, now a modern team site. We actually just made that change and starting to build out that template from that point of view. I'm going to do a modern client site. It has some specific things around permissions that are unique to it that I think make a lot of sense. Now, one of the things we haven't done in the form customization, I should really be hiding either the site URL or the alias, depending on which template I choose, because I only fill in one or the other. If I'm choosing a template that's based off of modern team site, which the client site and the project site both are, I don't set a URL for the site, I set an alias for the site. If I was to choose a classic team site or a modern communication site, I don't create an alias, I create a site URL. The reason for that difference is that when you're creating a modern team site, you're actually creating an email alias in exchange for that project site. So you can actually CC the project and have that stored into a shared mailbox as part of that project site. So let's give it a unique alias as part of that. Parent URL I'm going to talk more about later. This is a concept where we want to create a hierarchy. Like I mentioned, we created client sites and then we create project sites for each client. We want to capture that hierarchy. So we actually store the parent URL. So a client site would belong to the overarching client site, and then the project site would correspond to its particular client that it belongs to. And I'll show you examples of that afterwards. Now, we're going to talk about exposing these sites that we're creating to external users as well. So we need to create a group for that. So let's just call it the same as the group name. We'll just put the word external on there to identify that that's for the external users. And I can decide whether those people should have contributor read access. I'll set it as read access. All right, so I've filled out everything I need to request the site. I'm going to go ahead and save that. Now on this demo site, I don't actually have the automation wired up. 2 points. One, didn't get that far in terms of wiring things together. The other, though, is actually want to show you more step-by-step how the process works. So let me actually open up my PowerShell window. There's a couple of scripts that we would normally run up in Azure as part of the flow workflow. So the first one here is for the create site. So it basically looks at that list and says, well, is there any sites that I need to create? It needs to know which tenant it's connecting to. So it's got some configurations of different tenants. I'm going to choose number 3, which is our demo tenant. We store all the credentials securely in the Windows Credential Manager in the local system. So none of the scripts have credentials or passwords or anything like that stored in them. And it's now going through the process of creating that modern team site. Once it's created the initial out-of-the-box team site, it's then going to apply a template to that. So let's actually have a look at what the script's doing. It takes a minute or so to run through and do that. Like I said, it looks a little onerous. There's a lot of PowerShell in here, but it's actually pretty straightforward in terms of what it's doing. The first block is just kind of standard code, setting up some environment variables and things that all the scripts use, and then we get into the work of it here. I may have been passed in a particular list item to go get created. The PowerShell script or the flow workflow does that. And it's creating a query to say, well, go find me that particular item. Otherwise, just go find me all items that haven't been created yet. Whoops, looks like we had a little problem there applying the PNP template. There's still some timing issues that I'm working out that, the sites get created and sometimes things are still getting provisioned and set up on the SharePoint side before they get a chance to actually get ready for the scripts to continue from there. So let's have a look here and see how that site worked out. So here's my webinar demo 1 site. Let's go ahead and open that up. So I've got the out-of-the-box look and feel here, but it doesn't look like it created the other libraries for me here. So I'm going to do a little live debugging here and see if we can get things sorted out. So down in the script further here, it's created the various different sites, and when it's done all that, what it's doing is it's using what's called PNP, the patterns and practices from Microsoft. It's a bunch of open source code that Microsoft's been promoting out the last little while. Awesome packages there in terms of the ability to not just provision sites, but do all sorts of different work with the SharePoint sites and Office 365 as a whole. So I'm just going to rerun that provisioning step through there. What this is doing is it's taking an XML template that we'd saved previously. So we basically have a template site set up the way that we want a client site to work, and we snapshot that into a template file. And then later, as we create new modern team sites, we just apply that template to it, and it makes those sites look the same as the template one that we had created. So hopefully that runs through a little cleaner this time. Let's come back up. We were starting to walk through what the script was doing here. So it's basically finding the site that needs to get created, setting up a bunch of variables to define how that site's going to get created. And we've got a number of steps in here in terms of whether it's creating a classic, a modern site, whether there's a template that needs to be applied to that. So it's really a bunch of decision points. And these are really the things that you would customize if you had specific requirements. And then there's different steps to follow depending on whether I'm creating a classic style site or a modern style site, and whether that's a communication site or a team site. But at the end of all that, once the site's created, we get to the step that we're doing right now, which is to apply this provisioning template. And then we update some things in the list to make sure that things are properly tracked. It records that the site was created so it doesn't try and create it again, and it updates some breadcrumbs and other things in there as part of that as well. So if we look on our local file system for a minute, just while that's continuing to run, let me just pull this over. This is basically what's up in the GitHub site. So we've got a site templates folder here, and basically we've got two XML templates here. These are what were saved with the various different elements to customize for this particular client site template that we're looking for. And the same applies if I was to create a modern project site. I think that should be close to done. You can actually see it live making its changes. If I come back to the site here, even though it's still updating, we see we now have a private documents folder in here. As a net new library, it's got a bunch of folders associated with it as well. So it's been doing its work and going through and updating this to reflect what we look like from that point of view. Let's see if we're done there. Yes, we successfully went through. Awesome. Okay, so that was our first step, was to create the site. Now, I'm going to start the other step, because again, we've still got a couple of timing things we're working out there where things take a little while to come through. So let's go ahead and run this. And basically, this one is going to create that external group that we were looking at, the Webinar Demo 1 external, through our Extranet User Manager product. We're going to show you what that looks like in a minute. So it's basically calling out to our API in our product. So if we look up in here, again, looks a little onerous, don't be scared by it. It's basically doing calls out to our API here to create a new role for this external group. Once it's created the group, then it needs to come through, connect to the tenant. It needs to turn on the external sharing, because by default that's turned off on new site collections, and then add the permissions to the site. This is where we get some timing issues, that sometimes that group hasn't populated its way all the way through Azure Active Directory and into SharePoint to assign the permission. We have to wait a little longer for that to happen. So we'll let that run through, and let's have a look at the site while we're doing that. So if we look at the site contents, we've got a number of lists and libraries through here. So when we're collaborating with our clients, it's primarily around documents, and we have two classes of documents, ones that we want to share with our clients, ones that we want to keep private. Private examples would be things like budgets that we're working on, any sort of confidential information that we're keeping, quotes, things like that, versus in the documents folder, we're going to keep things like invoices and quotes that we do share with the client, anything that we're happy to share with them. So we're going to want to set up the permissions so that the client can see the site as a whole, but they don't have access to the private documents folder. So let's have a look back here. Yeah, it looks like that's still chugging through. So we'll give it a minute to catch up from that point of view, then we'll rerun that section there. Okay. So I mentioned our Extranet User Manager product. We haven't actually had a look at that yet. So let's come on over here and have a peek at that. So this is our new, we call it our landing admin, our administration console for Extranet User Manager. This can be used by IT administrators, but also intended to be used by business owners and even external users to manage the groups of external people that are going to be coming into the site. That's different levels of access. Right now I'm signed in as a configuration editor, so I have the ability to set up emails and templates and system settings and things like that. That would be more of an IT administrator role. For folks that just want to come in and invite users, they would just see the add, search, and import users options in here. I'm going to come down to the groups for a second though. Let's do a quick search on group, because the PowerShell is already run to create the Extranet User Manager group, so we should see it live in here now. So if I come down onto page 2 here, there's our Webinar Demo 1 external. So that's the group that we just created. It doesn't currently have any members or owners in it, so we'll have a look at that in just a second. So let's see if we can just rerun this. Yep, that works properly, so I can continue. So it's now added the permissions for the site, but it knows that it's a modern client site, and it says, well, I need to break the inheritance on that private documents library and remove that group, the external group, from that private documents library, because we don't want external users coming in and seeing that. We also want to give permission to that initial site that we created so that people coming in can use that to navigate into their site. And I'll explain a little later what that looks like and how that wires together. So let's come back to our site now. Apologies on jumping around a fair bit here. So if I look at my site permissions, I was like going back to the old advanced permission pages here. There's our extranet user manager group that we created, the webinar demo 1 external. It's listed as a domain group because it's actually created in Azure Active Directory. It's got read access to the site. What we see here, SharePoint's telling us, hey, some content on the site has different permissions. Show these items. Well, we see that private documents folder has different permissions. And if we go in there, we see that that external group is not listed in here. So they won't even be aware of the existence of this library because it won't show up anywhere in the interface from SharePoint. Okay, so we've got the site there. Now we want to actually invite some people in to use it. So let's come back to our extranet user manager and say, you know what, let's just add a net new user in through here. So I'm going to take you through two scenarios. The first scenario is going to be inviting a user where we're actually going to create an Office 365 account for them, and they're going to come in just like a regular licensed user. Now this scenario is typically not applicable for most users. For organizations that are charities or registered not-for-profits that can get free licensing from Microsoft, it actually makes a lot of sense. We've got some case studies around that. But for others, you probably wouldn't want to pay for Office 365 subscriptions for each of your external user. So in that case, we're going to talk about the Azure Active Directory B2B, which is the second scenario. Let me get through this first one first. So I need to put in the email address, the name, and that's about it. I can go ahead and add this user. Now what's going to happen is they're going to receive a welcome email to welcome them into the extranet. Now I need to put them in the right group so they have access to the site. So let's come into the add group here. We'll just search that, find our webinar demo 1 external group there, and I've now added them into that group. So I can go ahead and update that, and that person is all ready to go now. So let's actually flip to a different browser window here. I'm going to open up my Gmail window. Actually, you know what? I want to start fresh just so that everything's clean from this point of view. So let me just clear my browsing data. And we'll just refresh that. Okay, so we'll sign in using that user. And we'll see at the top of my inbox, there's a welcome email from my new account at EUM Extranet. So let's have a look at that. So this is customizable through the admin interface back here. I can configure things like the email configuration and define exactly what I want that welcome email to look like. So I've got placeholders that'll get replaced from a mail merge point of view. I can put in my own images and links and such as part of that, and this is the net result coming out from that. The goal, though, is to get the user to set a password and come into the extranet from there. So let's go ahead and click on the set a password link. Now, in the latest version of EUM, we've actually added social support in through here. So we can actually have a user sign in through either Google or Facebook, or create a password like a traditional email address and password type of login. Since I'm already coming in through my Gmail, I'm going to use the sign in with Google link and connect in through there. So what it's done now is it's connected the account that I just got invited to with my Google account. So when I want to come to the site later, I don't need to remember a password. I can just sign into Google. If I'm not already signed in, it'll go through the standard Google login, and then I'm in from there. So let's come to the main site now. Now there's a little extra step I got to do here. We haven't set up a smart link to bypass the initial login. So end user, you wouldn't want to see that. You want to take them right through to the extranet user manager login page, which is how we've done for a number of our charitable clients. So that's just bringing up the sign-in page. So here's our extranet user manager login page. I could log in with an email address and a password if I'd chosen that. I didn't. I chose Google, so I need to log in with Google. I'm already logged into Google, so it's just going to bypass right through there. Doesn't really matter how we do that. And it's now taking me to that same landing site where I requested the site. So this is where the permissions on the list at the end of that PowerShell script are important. So if I flip back for a minute to this view here, I'll go to the exact same page, signed in as an internal user. We see a whole bunch of sites in the list here. But when I go back to the window where I'm logged in with my Gmail account, I only see that one site that I've been invited to. So the goal of this is you can give this URL to all of your external users, regardless of what sites they have access to. And because this list is security trimmed, it will guide them down the right path to open up the site that's relevant for them. They may be invited to just one site, to multiple sites. I mean, we could add some additional functionality to this page here that if you only have one site in your list, just auto redirect to it. We did that in our older version of VUM. Let's go ahead and click on that site. So we're now into that webinar demo 1 site. I'm signed in as that Peter Gmail user that I invited in through there. So I only have limited ability through here. I don't have a full set of options through here. I can get into site contents. Oh, that's interesting. I'm seeing private documents. Of course, I did the dry run before, and that was all working fine. I'll have to have a look and see why that's letting me through there, because it should have locked that out to prevent access into there. But the net goal is I'm now able to consume all the information that's published up on this team site. What we do for a lot of our clients is we actually create a third document library called client documents in here as well, and that becomes a place where they have contribute access. We may not want them editing all the documents in our site, but it's great to have a spot for them to drop stuff off or to collaborate with us from there. They can see the activity feed, so they have the same ability to see what's been recently added and organized through there. So it's a great experience from a modern site point of view. Now you notice that I don't have access to conversations and the broader Office 365 groups. If I come back to this site here, I have the ability to jump out into other parts of the Office 365 group as an internal user. In the external user point of view here, we haven't made them a member of the Office 365 group. All we wanted to do was share a select portion of the content from the SharePoint site out. I mean, there are scenarios where you do want to invite the external user to your Office 365 group, and in that case, you would use the out-of-the-box sharing features from Microsoft. This is more around where you want to have a very controlled, organized, where you've got large numbers of external users that you want to share those sites out through there. So let's go through the second scenario now, which is I want to invite somebody, but I don't want to create a license for them. So if I come back to my extranet user manager here, I've actually got a user already pre-configured in here that I've saved. So let me just pull up a deactivated user. Of course, I've got too many of the same name in there. Oh, well, we'll use this one here. Okay, so this is already a member of a couple of other groups. Let's go ahead and remove those ones out. I don't want to clutter things up. And we want to add in the group that we just created. We can update that. Now this is still a deactivated user, so what I need to do is change their status to Azure B2B. And this is a service that's provided by Microsoft. The idea is you can invite external users in. They can have access through your Azure AD into select sites in SharePoint that you share, and there is no licensing requirements for that. So you don't need to have a separate subscription for those users. This benefit there is you could have hundreds, thousands, however many number of external users you have coming into your site. You only pay subscriptions for your internal staff that are accessing the site, not for those external users that are coming in. So just while that's getting going, I'm going to open up another browser and log in as that external user into my own Office 365 tenant. So I'm not signing into the tenant I'm inviting into now. I'm actually going into our main Envision IT intranet. So this is a whole different SharePoint tenant here. Let's come back to our page here. Looks like that updated. Let me just refresh and make sure there. Yep. Okay. So again, there's a welcome email that goes out. It's a slightly different format. You've got a different template for the B2B, but let's pull that open here. And here's my welcome email. You've been invited to access the EOM extranet. Now out of the box, Microsoft normally sends these emails on your behalf. With the extranet user manager product, we actually take that over, allow you to customize, and the email comes from your own organization's email address. We're talking with clients about taking that even further to say, well, what if I want to send the invitation email myself personally? We could put a mail to link into our landing admin and let people just launch out to their browser and invite a user in that way. So that's sort of a future roadmap idea that we're looking at. Okay, so I need to click on the invitation here. I just need to make sure I'm in the right browser because I've got too many browser windows going. There we go. So remember, I'm accepting this invitation signed into my Envision IT Office 365, not my EOM demo Office 365. So it's telling me that I'm being invited to this other tenant. I need to hit next. It's now setting up that share between the two Azure ADs, logging me into the landing site. Now, still having a little issue with the list and the B2B side. Let's actually go to the site itself that we were working with. So if we come back to Webinar Demo 1, let's actually just go straight into that site. Yeah, my demo gods are not cooperating today for me. So that should just let me right into that site there. I think there's still some timing issues from the permissions point of view that we're working out there. Okay, so where do we stand now? We've taken a walkthrough of the site creation process, how the group gets created, how you then invite external users in, whether they're getting accounts created directly in the tenant or whether they're being invited in through the B2B sharing. So let's think about sort of future state and what are some of the things we can do from there. So we've got another site here. Should have saved the URL. No, that's not it. Apologies while I pull this up. Oh, of course, it's in my list. I should just go back to the landing home. Forgetting to use my own tools. Project demo, that's the one I want. So this is an example site. Now this is still proof of concept. It's not actually live running wired into extranet user manager, but we wanted to share some thoughts of where we're going from a future direction point of view. So the idea is rather than having to come back over into here to invite users, why don't we let people do it right in the project site that we've created? I think it'd be a much better user experience for them. So we're working on some SharePoint Framework web parts to do just that. And this is a mock-up of the new web part that we're creating here. Basically, the idea is you drop the web part on and you point it to the site or the group that's created an extranet user manager, and it lists all the members of the group there for you. And that's something that can be done as part of the site provisioning. So every client site, every project site that gets created that has external sharing on it would have this web part dropped on it, and it would show exactly who the site is shared with. So when the site gets first created, obviously there wouldn't be anybody in the list, and you'd be able to add users through there. There's sort of two scenarios to that. I mean, either you could do a search of users and say, well, I want to add these people in. Now, again, it's mock-up, so nothing's changing through there. Or I actually want to add net new users. I want to put in their name, their email address, their phone number, go ahead and save them, have that welcome email go out, and have them invited into the site from there. Now, some other interesting things we can do as part of the web part, since this is a project collaboration area, email, phone is primary ways a lot of people coordinate, particularly with external parties. So be able to just click on a link there and pull up a mail to link ready to go to send an email off to that person. Or if we say, well, you know what, we've got something I want to communicate to the project as a whole, or maybe some of the project members, click off who I want to send to, hit the email link up here, and have a mail to link created, ready to go with all the links on there. I could phone people because we've got their phone numbers recorded in there, or I could remove people out of the group. So I could say, well, Peter doesn't need to be here anymore, click the delete button, remove them out of that group. So the idea is you basically live in this SharePoint site that's been created for the project, and you manage all your external users directly in there. The reason we're able to do this is because we've rewritten our Extranet User Manager product to use an API-based approach. It's basically how our PowerShell is calling out to create the groups initially. This SharePoint Framework web part can do the same thing. It can call out to those APIs, say, get me all the people, add in new people, change people, do all those things without requiring you to actually come back to the whole admin console. So you can actually embed that functionality right into your SharePoint site. So that's one of the interesting things that we've got on the go there. The other thing, as I promised in the teaser for the webinar itself, was how we leverage that list in some other ways. So let me actually come back to our main Envision IT site. So if we come here, a couple of things I want to cover off here. First off, up at the top here, we've got a control from another partner, itgroove.net, called Masthead Office 365. And it's a nice thing. I'm going to put a plug-in for them because it solves a big pain point I find in the Office 365 groups, which is just navigating around through them. You know, you get all these different site collections. How do you get from one to the other? And having a consistent global nav across all those is something that's really important. So Masthead allows you to do that. It's basically an add-in that you attach to your tenant. It runs up in Azure and it injects the navigation in for you. It's got a whole editing interface so you can actually manage what shows up under each of these through here. So if I come over to my Clients tab for a second here, so we were in a modern communication site. We flipped into a classic site. We haven't put Masthead on the classic sites just yet. That's part of our roadmap plan. We can see here we've got an A to Z web part of clients. So the idea is it's very quick and easy to be able to go through this various different lists here and basically find the clients that you're looking for. So there's one recently we just created. The Community Living Haldeman is a new project that we're kicking off next week. And when you look at the URL there, actually go ahead and click on the link, you'll see that this is one of our new modern client sites. So it's built using the same template and the same process. We've actually got that same idea of being able to add an entry to the list, but it's actually wired in automatically. So if I come back here for a second and go to Flow, I can actually see the automation process around it. So we've got a flow in here that says, hey, when a new item gets created, let me just edit the flow and show you the details of that. So it's basically looking at that same sites list that we were looking at before and saying if something new gets created in it, go ahead and call the PowerShell to create that site and then send me an email, send the requester an email. So Flow is very easy for you to build out fairly complex workflows here, put rules in, tie into SharePoint list data or even external systems like this create site is hosted up in Azure as a custom connector that we've created and published to Flow. So that's how it's all wired together on this site here. Now that A to Z web part, let me just go back one step for a second. The way it works, it's actually a SharePoint Framework web part. The nice thing about the new SharePoint Framework web parts is you can use them on both modern sites and classic sites. So if I go ahead and edit this web part, press the configure button here, we can see how to configure it. I can either have just a list of all sites, which is a little bit long and onerous in this case here, or I can have it as a to Z tabs organized through there. It basically says go find the sites in this URL in this list and display them up on there. Now the parent URL is blank here. Basically what it's doing, it's saying go find me every site whose parent is the site I'm currently in. And all the client sites roll up into this site here, so we've got a nice hierarchy from that point of view. So let me just cancel out of all this. And I'll discard my changes. I don't want to mess up anything from that point of view. And when we look down at the Community Living Haldeman, we'll see that we've got a project sites part here. So this is the modern page that we're on now. I'm actually using that same A to Z web part. So if I edit that web part, the editing interface looks a little bit different on modern sites. It's a little bit cleaner. It's basically configured the same way, except rather than using tabs, because there's only actually one child site from here, it's basically finding any sites whose parent URL is, again, the site that I'm currently in here. So let's go have a look at that list and just see how that's wired together. So I'll discard these changes as well. So if I open another tab here, I'll go to that landing site. We see we've got the same ability to request a new site. We have the same Power Apps in there as part of that. There are spots where I do find it easier to go into Classic. Things like search aren't there in the Modern just yet. So we'll actually flip back to the Classic mode. And let's actually just type in Haldeman, which is that client that we were looking at. No, we actually have a few different Haldemans. Let's do CLH, that'll be a little bit easier. There we go. Okay, so we can see the first one here is the client site. So it's a modern client site that is created from its parent URL is /site/clients. And what we've done is actually created a breadcrumb based on that hierarchy. And then the second one above it is actually the project site for the project that we're doing for that client. So it's a modern project site. Its parent URL is actually the one below. So you can see it builds out the hierarchy based on that. The idea is that we're actually going to embed that breadcrumb URL right into the sites themselves. So our goal is on the modern sites as well as the classic ones, we're actually working with IT Groove, the makers of this Masthead Global Nav here, to actually extend that and allow us to build our own custom add-ins as part of that for things like embedding a breadcrumb so we can see that hierarchy through there. Because one of the things that we find is clients are used to having a sort of a sub-site hierarchy and organization of their SharePoint site. It makes it easier to navigate around and understand where you are. Microsoft's going away from that and saying, well, everything's a top-level site collection. They've brought out hub sites. They haven't hit the ground just yet, which allow you to have a two-level hierarchy in there. But this we find is a little more flexible and takes it even further from that point of view. We can use that, to roll up not just from a project site to a client, but the client to the upper client's top-level site up to the root site collection itself. We can build that hierarchy out. And one of Microsoft's arguments for pushing everything towards site collections is that it's much more flexible and easier to reorganize your site. Well, the nice thing is with our breadcrumb URL and parent URL ID that we've got in here, it's as simple as changing who your parent URL, and you've changed that logical relationship of where that site sits. So it still gives you that same flexibility to reorganize your site very easily through there. Sorry, I'm just going to bring up the notes for the event itself. I feel like I'm missing something here, but this is the first time I've given this particular talk, so it's a little bit of a dry run as we go through here. Apologies. So we've gone through the process to extend the site provisioning that we did in the last webinar and how we can bring in the extranet user manager as part of that, the ability for site owners then to manage their permissions. I probably didn't explain this point well enough through here. So if we come back to, let's see, our demo site here. So imagine I'm the business owner of this particular project. I have the ability to manage the members of the external group here and invite people in through here. That can be granted to me by IT or whoever governs the SharePoint infrastructure as a whole without giving me rights to change permissions. So they can set up all the permissions and sharing properly from that point of view, and then just give me the keys to who I get to invite in. So it's a nice separation from that point of view, from a governance point of view. Because what happens often is if you give everybody the access to change permissions in SharePoint, it gets broken inheritance all over the place. Permissions become a mess, and it becomes really hard to tidy that up and clean that up. In fact, there's whole vendors that have created tools just around looking for that situation and trying to correct it. I feel the better approach is to say, well, let's prevent it from happening in the first place, give the ability to have people invite who they want into their site without necessarily managing the permissions as a whole in the site. The group member web part, which is still a work in progress, is the one here that we were just going through. And then the A to Z web part was the one that I was showing you on the top level client site as well as an individual client site. And then the breadcrumb control is something we're still working with the Masthead folks to see if we can embed that into the site navigation from there. So I think we're actually done a little bit early. We've got a couple more slides that I want to come from, and then we'll give you a little bit of time back. So just from a wrap-up point of view, we didn't get too deep into the other parts of Office 365 groups. It can be a confusing conversation. No pun intended. There's a lot of styles of conversations in Office 365 groups, whether you use email, Yammer, Teams, different ways of doing that, and deciding which which makes sense for your organization or for the project in particular, and work with it from there. You don't need to use all the different tools right out of the get-go. You could just use modern team sites and SharePoint if you want to do to start with. But I'd encourage you to look deeper into 365 groups. They're a pretty cool way to collaborate as an organization. Be prepared for change. That's kind of the new mantra with Office 365. Microsoft is rolling things out fast and furious, and it's sometimes a little hard to keep up. Fasttrack.microsoft.com is a good site to keep track of. That's where their roadmap is, and they keep you abreast as to what's coming down the pipe from that point of view. Kind of reiterating the first point, deciding which conversation formats make sense for you, Outlook, Yammer, Teams. If people aren't familiar with Microsoft Teams, think of it as instant messaging with persistence, kind of like Slack in the non-Microsoft world, where you can instant message back and forth with people, but it's available there for people to review afterwards. Make sure you got your governance plan in place. I mentioned some things to think about around permissions management versus group membership and how you want to divide responsibilities from that point of view. What is your external user policy? Our plans for our next webinar is actually going to be around just sort of out of the box versus external user manager sharing, where each of those makes sense, because we're not the caveat and end all and be all for all things external sharing. Microsoft's done a great job of the one-to-few sharing, but you need to decide how to configure that and light that up. And that's going to be part of what we're going to be talking about next month in our monthly webinar series. And where it makes sense to use Extranet User Manager for broader sort of one-to-many external sharing that you want to do. Figure out your information architecture and your site templates. I shared a little bit of what our client site template looks like in our project site template. We've actually included that in the GitHub repository. So if you're curious and you want to have a look at things, that is there and available to have a look at. And think about building out a provisioning process. Just letting everybody willy-nilly create sites is probably not a good idea. But flip token, having email requests all go to one or two people in IT to create sites often creates a backlog, and people get frustrated and start doing their own things outside of Office 365 altogether. So you want to strike the right balance from that point of view. So I got one more poll just from a follow-up plans point of view. Let me just pull that out. Just curious, how this has resonated with people, whether there's interested in implementing it right away, something that you'd like to do maybe in the next 3 to 6 months, or it's cool, but maybe not something you want to move forward on just now. So I'll give you a minute just to think about that and respond. Very good. And just last slide, just a heads up on upcoming events. So I mentioned April 24th is our next scheduled webinar. Didn't have the details when we were putting this together, but basically looking to do sort of an all-up external sharing Office 365. What does that look like with Extranet User Manager versus out of the box? Where would you use each of those and how does that fit in? I'm also going to be down in Washington, D.C. next week. So I'm doing a full day workshop that's going to go through all the open source that I went through here today. It's going to be a very hands-on session. People can actually work through that and get that up and running in their own tenant as part of that. I'm also doing a number of other talks through the week. And then SharePoint Conference North America, Logan is our sales guy. He'd be the one to follow up with questions from here. We're going to be down the latter part of May for the big SharePoint Conference North America event in Las Vegas. So I want to thank everybody for taking the time out of their day. Hope you have a great rest of your day. And if there's any way we can help, any questions you have, feel free to reach out. Be more than happy to support you from that point of view. Thanks, everyone. Bye now.